Welcome to the Rocks Back Pages podcast. I'm Barney Hoskins, and I'm in sunny Hammersmith with my old muckers Mark Pringle.
Hi, Barney.
And Jasper Morrison Bowie.
Hello, Barney.
And joining us on December the 11th for the first episode of 2026 is Mr. Thurston Moore. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Barney. Thanks, guys.
We're delighted to have you here to talk about a brand new book you've published entitled Now Jazz Now, 100 Essential Free Jazz and Improvisation Recordings 1960 to 1980. Written with the Swedish saxophone player Mats Gustafsson and RBP contributor Byron Coley, who guested on this podcast back in August and was delightful. It spans the length and breadth of free jazz from Eric Dolphy to John Zorn. Plus, it features a lovely reflection from Don Cherry's stepdaughter, Nena. First off, though, let's start with a little bit about your lowercase sonic youth in Connecticut. You've told your story in incredible detail in the memoir Sonic Life, which I have sitting here beside me. Can you remember a specific experience that made you the musical obsessive that you are?
A specific experience, I think it was just sort of having an older brother who was 5 years, who is still 5 years older than I, bringing records into the house. And my father was a musician. He played classical piano. His mother, my grandmother, was a classical pianist as well. A bit of a society pianist, and we were living in southern Florida in South Miami, and early 60s, mid 60s. And so there's music in the house always. Yes. And my father was always just like pounding on the piano, and there was a Victrola console that we'd play classical records on. But my brother is the one who brought in the first rock and roll record, which I write about at the outset of my book Sonic Life, of just bringing Louie Louie in and playing that record incessantly. I was all of 6-7 years old. He would tell me that it was him and his friends, and they recorded this record.
Did your father bang on the door and tell you to turn it down?
Yeah. But my brother would sort of like poke his head into the room and sort of mouth the lyrics as the record was playing. And but you didn't know what those lyrics were anyway. They were just like garbled. Nobody, even though it was an infamous song for what are those lyrics? And they were supposedly they were filthy. But and only Iggy kind of brought that to light on Metallic KO when you heard him sing what the lyrics possibly could have been.
The X-rated lyrics.
Yeah. So I thought that was like hearing Metallic KO to me was like kind of a mixed bag, because I kept hearing that it was like this incredible document of the Stooges live, and then when you finally heard the record, it was kind of a duff recording in a way.
It was,
It was kind of just slightly a little slightly flatulent in a way. I expected to have this powerhouse kind of thing going on, but that version of Louie Louie, when all is lost at the end of the set, and like the bikers are just throwing things at him, and he does that, and he sings those lyrics. It just made it all worthwhile. It's like, yes, that's the Louie Louie that we've all wanted to hear for so long. So
there's a fab picture, one of the color pictures in the insets in Sonic Life, of your family after you've moved up to Connecticut, in Bethel, Connecticut in 1971, and Gene's right in the middle, and he looks like such a rock dude. You look like such a sweet, innocent, like whatever age you were then, like 13-year-old, and Gene's got this kind of fantastic,
oh, that's great.
Just perfect.
Yeah.
He could have been in, I don't know which band.
I mean, it's 72, 71 right there, and so he's got this kind of long hair, and he's listening to Jefferson Airplane and collecting Jefferson Airplane records, and I'm still maybe too young to sort of. I don't think I was allowed to like freak out, let my freak flag fly like that. They
wait another couple of years.
They would have kicked me out of school, I think.
Terrible question. How old are you now?
I'm 65.
Right.
I was born in 58. Is that correct? Yeah. 65 going on 66 next year? Or am I 66?
I think you've lopped off a year there, because I know how old I am. Yeah, sneaky.
Is it? I have no problem being in.
I know you don't.
I don't really care. I like 66. It's more satanic, you know.
But you know you're getting old when you actually don't know how old.
I know exactly how old I am. I'm going to be 70 next year.
Right.
So
Of course, I had an older brother. He had parallel experiences.
Absolutely. I mean, my mother was into classical music. They didn't listen to it. We didn't have a record player in the house until my brother put his foot down in about 1966, and so we have to have something to play records on. And he was the one bringing things like Are You Experienced and all these records. So, I mean, we saved up all our pocket money to buy A Hard Day's Night. And we were sixpence short, and the guy in the shop let us have it anyway. First record I bought for myself was Twist and Shout EP.
Which I was bought by my parents. Yeah. So there we are.
But my brother was 5 years older than me, and he was the one. He was bringing Velvet Underground. I mean, 1968, 69, he's bringing Velvet Underground album. So it must be one of like 5,000 people in the whole of England to actually own those records at the time.
Oh yeah, I would imagine.
Richard Williams being another.
Yeah.
Of the 5.
Yes.
I mean, it's a daft question, but if Gene, your older brother, hadn't owned and like playing electric guitar and so forth, might you have become like a full-time rock writer rather than a musician?
Oh, good question. I mean, I was more sort of attuned to literature in a way. And I realized that if there was one thing that I excelled at in academics, it was always about English. You know, it was. In fact, I didn't even have to think about it. I aced it all the time. The sciences, mathematics, everything. I was really difficult for me.
Same here.
And so I was always drawn to reading everything that was in front of me. You know, and writing. You know, and I would write. I would sit at a manual typewriter, and I would copy write magazine articles. And there was Time magazine had a film critic. There was a film critic in Time magazine. It was a gentleman who does a lot of screenwriting for Martin Scorsese.
Jay Cox. And Jay Cox would write about the most interesting films in Time magazine. And he would review them. And there were films I could never see because they were all only in these urban cinemas in New York City. They were never in the rural cinemas of Bethel, Connecticut. So I wouldn't be able to see Panic in Needle Park unless I took a train to Manhattan and saw this. Well, it would have been a very bad influence on you if you had.
But I was very, very curious about it.
Sure.
Particularly from Jay Cox's writing about it. But I would type out Jay Cox's reviews and I would collect them on typewriter paper.
That's the way to learn to write.
And so all these years later, living in New York, and my musician friend Don Fleming from the Velvet Monkeys, and et cetera, his wife Margaret Body becomes Martin Scorsese's personal assistant, and so we go to some event, and Jay Cox is there. And I'm introduced to Jay Cox. I mean, I'm in my 50s at this point. And I said, I have to tell you something, Mr. Cox. When I was a young lad, I used to type out all of your reviews from Time magazine. I had a stack of them next to my typewriter. And he kind of looked at me in disbelief, and he said, like, he goes, you got to be kidding me. I was like, no. And then he said, I'm going to get a drink.
Oh, ouch.
Yeah. He didn't know what he was, who he was in front of at that point. And so I never talked to him again. But yeah.
He's sort of avoiding you.
It taught me, in some ways, you know, in retrospect, it really it taught me a lot about how to write in sort of a journalistic sense, you know. And I was really into journalism. And even in Sonic Life, I try to talk about like how the music writers were as influential and inspirational and as intriguing as even the subjects they were talking about. Well, so Lester Bangs talking about Iggy, it's just like, I'm just as interested in Lester's voice as I am in Iggy's voice, you know. So that to me was always a really interesting relationship. And, you know, of course, Patti Smith's all lowercase kind of like, you know, proselytizing of whatever she was, you know, assigned to write about, you know. But Patti Smith sort of, you know, she did a piece in Cream where she talked about like being a critic, and she said, you know, the Latin genesis of the word critic was about to praise, you know. And she goes like, so why would I do anything else except for like, you know, write something as an ode of praise, you know. And I was like, oh, that makes sense. He's like, why waste your time writing something negative anyways? He's like, why bring that energy into the page?
I love that negative energy. I mean, it's one of the things that distinguishes the British music press from the American music press.
The willingness to be really nasty.
To be really nasty.
Yeah, I think it's probably true.
I mean, there's certainly there's certainly an art to sort of, like of the pan, but
well, all of this is a perfect cue just to line up this clip from an audio interview with you from 1994, so it's quite a long time ago, by Steve Roeser, who was basically asking about your entire career to that point for a goldmine piece. So it's relevant. Let's listen.
I was like 17 or 18 in 77. And I remember like in 76 seeing a picture of Sex Pistols at the 100 Club, and there's this group in London that's kind of weird, and I remember just being enamored by that, in Rock Scene magazine. And I don't know, I was just always drawn to that kind of underworld of rock, and the New York Dolls, and just magazines like Cream magazine and Rock Scene really hyped up this underworld, and I was really fascinated by it, more so than I was by the Marshall Tucker Band. That's what kids in school listening to. That's sort of what was good about rock was Marshall Tucker, Allman Brothers, Yes. And I certainly thought so too, maybe. I was like, yeah, that's the shit. But I was really drawn to like Todd Rundgren and Alice Cooper and New York Dolls, and Bowie, and small town Connecticut, that was not a very popular.
Did you ever take a trip down there when you were still in high school to go to any of those clubs?
Yeah.
Like the Max's Kansas City or anything?
Yeah, I had one friend in high school who was kind of aware of of Patti Smith. He was aware of Patti Smith, and he was also the only like gay person in high school, although he was not out of the closet, but he was the most effeminate person in high school. And he approached me and said, like, I heard you're into Patti Smith. And I was like, Soul Brother.
16 and time to pay off. I get this job in a piss factory inspecting pipe.
And that's
funny.
Your friend Harold.
Yeah, that's my friend Harold. Yeah,
what a great name for an effeminate guy.
Harold Paris.
Yeah, Harold Paris. Was it real?
It was definitely real. In fact, he was very proud of that. There was a group called Paris. Remember them from the early 70s?
Yeah.
He was very proud of so he goes, I'm not so much proud of it, but he was slightly upset that he could not have a group called Paris when he got older, because that's, they was already, it was taken. Yeah.
Well, I mean, imagine how I feel about being called Bowie.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so anyway, Harold was a really good friend of mine, and we really discovered punk rock together, and nobody else in our environment, in our school or whatever was interested in that at all. So, when was that interview from?
1994.
94.
Yeah, we have it's on Rock's Back Pages, and we have the finished article as well on Rock's Back Pages. So the exact date, I'm guessing it's kind of early 94. Yeah. And I listened to probably about a quarter of it, and so it was interesting to sort of see some of the same stories and things and names popping up in the book, inevitably.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same. To me, it's sort of like I really wanted to sort of talk about. In Sonic Life, I really wanted to talk about the documents that informed me as far as like being devotional to the vocation of being in music. Whether you're playing music, whether you're writing about music, but just being involved with it, and engaged with it full time, and how to accomplish that. But like what really brings you into it, and to me, it was all about the different records and books and magazines, et cetera, and how significant they were, and how that was a shared significance with this kind of disparate, population, because you didn't really know anybody at that age, growing up in rural Connecticut, so meeting somebody like Harold Paris, who had an interest in certainly Patti Smith, and then like the more sort of like glamorous things that were coming out of New York. I mean, he was a Bowie kid.
Yes.
You know, same way as like Sid Vicious was a Bowie kid. You know, you were Bowie kids.
Yes.
And then you saw what was going on with something like Blondie, which was like very attractive. You know, and like. And Patty was really attractive, and you know, just like this whole new thing was all very attractive, and so, you know, everybody was sort of stuck in this kind of prog rock world of ELP and Yes, and again, like the Southern rock, you know, Allman Brothers, Marshall Tucker thing, which was really ruling the FM airwaves, and you know, and it just seemed like kind of just sort of boorish to us at that point.
Definitely.
Yeah, I don't know. So you know, finding at least one person who was interested in that and being able to sort of become buddies, you know, and he was dealing with his own personal life, you know, like, you know, figuring out how to sort of come out as a gay kid, and he wasn't when we were hanging out. It wasn't really until later into like even the early '80s where he kind of like sort of like, you know, realized that, and he kind of met somebody and had a relationship that was like really serious, and then he moved away, and I never really saw him again.
I wanted to sort of relate your kind of discovery of things like the Stooges, you talked about Iggy earlier, to, you know, what we'll be talking about later, to free jazz. And there's a point very early in the book where you talk about Funhouse, the second Stooges album, and you say, when the session concluded with the free jazz of LA Blues, it was as if a lid had been, sorry, I'm going to read that again because it didn't make sense. Okay. When the session concluded with the free jazz of LA Blues, it was as if a lid that had attempted to contain all the band's clamour was released at once, the sonic snakes of heavy metal hell creepy crawling every which way, ravaging my very reality. Was LA Blues, which, you know, a lot of people don't get to the end of LA Blues when they play Funhouse, because it is exactly as you describe it. I mean, was that, in retrospect, like the first sort of taste of free jazz?
It was a shocking thing to hear.
Yes.
I mean, that record was shocking to begin with, but I remember being very curious about it because I would read about it in Cream magazine, especially. But you would never see it in the record racks in most of the record stores. It just didn't exist. The first Stooges album, for some reason, you would see in cutout stasis, you know, it would just be remaindered, and you would see like multiple copies of it in the local Woolworth's record department. And I would always look at it because it was 49 cents. And there was a lot of different records, like there was Ambergris, you know, the Rhinoceros, you know, these
Rhinoceros boys in the carpet.
And you would just like, and you would buy these records because they were 49 cents. It's all you could really afford, and they were generally terrible records. But I eventually went for the Stooges record, and I was a little sort of concerned about it because, I mean, these four gentlemen on the cover of that first record they looked really like they were bad news. You know, there was something going on there, and you know, I was sort of, like I said in that interview in Goldman, I mean, I was always kind of attracted to the subversive, you know, that was in rock and roll, and I wanted to sort of hear like what maybe should not be heard or something. And so that record really delivered in a certain way because it was so monodynamic, you know, unlike any other group at that time. It just it dealt with this kind of monodynamism. It was just like, even Iggy said it was considered just like a sub-mental documentary or something, you know. and it sounded like that. I remember like thinking like, God, did they it sounded like they recorded like, you know, it was like a toy record or something. So that first Stooges album wasn't really like it didn't come across as like a powerful record. Mm-hmm. It sounded there was something sort of very sort of thin on the ground with it. I mean, it could have been the Kale mix or whatever, but you know, unless you had like a really great stereo where you could crank it up. But, you know, it just sounded, compared to like the big, huge, you know, Yes records that were coming out, it's just like, it didn't really sort of have the same vibe. So it was a confusing record, but I knew that I liked it.
See, isn't that right? I want some tonight.
I liked the minimalism of it. And there was something about it. But it didn't. I couldn't sell it at all to any friends I had. Where if I would brought a record over to their house and I would play that, they would like, take that off. You know, this is ridiculous. Put Deep Purple on, please, now.
Yeah, I had exactly the same experience with White Like White. He put it on at parties and everyone would say, "Take that record off."
Yeah, because what is this? Something wrong? There's dirt on the needle or something. So finding Funhouse in a record store in Miami Beach when I was visiting relatives as a kid, and seeing that just sitting there, I knew it had, and it was priced to move. And so it didn't cost that much. It was like maybe $4. I actually told Iggy this, that because he lives in Miami. Yes. I said, I found Funhouse here like in 72, I think. But that record, it upped the game so much on the first Stooges album was to such an extent.
Powerful, isn't it?
Yeah, and it was such a powerful record. And I can still recall like the first playing through that record on both sides, and then it just like that last track, L.A. Blues. And to think that it was called L.A. Blues, I thought it was going to be a bit of a blues piece.
Think again.
But it was this kind of unshackled, unleashing, but I didn't know it was free. I didn't know it was free jazz. I didn't know it was even free rock, free noise, or whatever. I didn't think about free. I just thought like they're totally wigging out. I mean, they're just going for it.
There is an interesting kind of historical point to this in a way that the Detroit scene, everything out of John Sinclair, basically, they always embraced the early free players. I mean, the MC5 did too.
Exactly.
Yes.
It was a very, very strange local thing that they had going there.
Yeah, well, that's something I would discover later. Like there was this whole scene around the Grande Ballroom in Detroit where it's like you would have like the Stooges and MC5 and Bob Seger, and then you would have Archie Shepp and Sun Ra and Pharoah Sanders, all on the same bill. And and John Sinclair was very, very, very significant in bringing those things together, avant-garde jazz and sort of this new rock kind of like very sort of politically conscious kind of like high energy rock. So that to me that was something that I gleaned later.
Right.
Certainly through reading, people like Lenny Kaye, who was like sort of a scholar of like Detroit high energy music, and so you could glean a lot of it from reading him, and the fact that Cream sort of originated from Detroit, Michigan. So they were only you sort of got the news from that, and I just became really interested in that, and in some ways just Lenny Kaye was so important because he's a New Yorker who's very interested in what's going on in Detroit, and so that relationship between what was happening in Detroit and what was happening in the underground in New York with the New York Dolls and coming up, to me that sort of really was what was the precursor that kind of morphed into punk rock. Were those two scenes more than anything. L.A. was like almost like another planet. And so in some ways, L.A. wasn't getting signals from outside of its own. It was like pretty much just like its own weirdo Kim Fowley damage that was happening around. I think they were interested.
Kim Fowley damage. Is there any other kind?
Well, I don't know if you ever heard the Kim Fowley record "Outrageous."
You mentioned that in the book.
So that's
a masterpiece, which I wish Kim had been around to read that.
It's such a demented concept record because it's all about the paranoia of like late period hippie, just like doing acid and like the cops are banging on the door, and it's Kim Fowley doing this kind of like the theater piece on this record called "Outrageous." And he has all these kind of crackerjack kind of session musicians, like these kind of Three Dog Night guys and stuff playing in the studio. And they're just killing it, playing these like, it's almost like the Screaming Lord Sutch record,
Yes.
With Jimmy Page
with his
on
heavy
it.
friends. Screaming Lord Sutch and his heavy friends.
I mean, Jay Maska said that. He said that's Jimmy Page's best album.
Fantastic. Let's flip back to the East Coast because I just want to get to, you're in New York at this point. It's like early 80s. And I want to mention this particularly because of the Coachmen, and I know I saw that J.D. King had
just
died
passed away,
just the other day, and so couldn't really let that go by.
Yeah.
Do you want to just talk very briefly about the Coachmen, who certainly, among other claims to fame, were the tallest group ever to walk the streets of New York?
We were the tallest group.
All of you were like over 6'5".
Well, not all of it. The drummer,
the drummer was quite short.
The drummer was, yeah. Oh, I mean, I don't know if he was certainly diminutive compared to the three of us.
Tall compared to me.
No, they were graduates from Rhode Island School of Design, and they were the class right after Talking Heads people.
Okay.
And I met J.D. King, who, visual artist, illustrator, an aficionado of just like, just good underground guitar rock. He loved Link Wray. He loved the Modern Lovers. He had seen the Artistics, who were the pre-Talking Heads group. While he was at RISD, the Rhode Island School of Design, and so I met him at Cutler's Record Store in New Haven, Connecticut, in 77, I think.
Yes.
And I would always go in there and bug the proprietor. They're like, do you have this chunky Novi and Ernie album? Because John Cale produced it. I was looking for things like that, or bands like Sailor or whatever, just things that were sort of from the margins. And then when I heard that Blondie had recorded a record for like Private Stock, which was Richard Goderer's label, I said, "Do you have that record?" And he would say, "How do you know about this?" And I was just like, I just sort of had my ear to this thing. And it was a great record store because in the back there was a singles department. It was the first place that brought in imports from the UK. So that's where you found Anarchy in the UK. That's where you found New Rose. That's where you found these first records.
New Rose, which
and the
disappointed you because it had a guitar solo.
Yes. Well, I was disappointed because they had put a sticker on it that said England's Ramones, and
So there definitely won't be any solos.
And so they hear Brian James kind of shredding on it. I was like, "Wait, what are you doing?"
Stop!
And the fact that they were doing a Beatles cover, like, no more Beatles, Stones, or Elvis in '77. But anyway, they completely decimated and made mincemeat in a glorious fashion of Help. It was fantastic B-side. And, New Rose is one of the greatest songs ever written. So, I mean, I kind of forgave it by the time it was even over. I was just like, no, let's forget about it. This record is so smoking.
I'll live with the solo.
You're allowed
I can live with the solo. Yeah.
Permitted.
I'll just sort of deafen myself.
But there was a Velvet Underground placard, and there was never anything really in it, but you would always go towards it. You would go towards, like, if there was a Stooges or a Velvet Underground placard, you would go towards it, and it would always be empty. And of course it was empty, and I saw this like bespectacled Buddy Holly looking character just standing there sort of forlornly. And I just sort of said to him, I said, "Not much happening in the Velvet's bin these days, is there?" And he looked at me, he said, "Have you heard Live 1969? And I was like, "Yeah, of course, I mean, it's like, it's just a wonderful record." He goes like, "Have you seen Punk Magazine? Blah, blah, blah." He kept asking me these questions, and we traded addresses and numbers, as you would in those days. And we kind of wrote back and forth. He kept all my letters. He has just since passed. I don't know where my letters are, but he did read them aloud once to a fanzine in New Jersey called Flesh and Bones, and they kind of reprinted them verbatim from him talking on the phone. It was a really good interview. Flesh and Bones was a really, really good sort of hardcore fanzine, but it was kind of made light of a lot of the hardcore scene, and it was very sort of comics graphic influence as well. It was really very influenced in some ways by Holmstrom and Legs McNeil's Punk magazine.
Well, you had your own fanzine, of course.
Yeah, I started a fanzine called Killer in around 83, I think.
Yeah.
And
when Sonic Youth were already making waves.
Yeah, we were just kind of getting it together, and the only band that we had any really connection to at that time was Swans.
Yes.
And
I saw you guys at, in my mind, it's the Marquee. Do you remember playing the Marquee?
The Marquee, I don't remember playing. to tell you
maybe
the
it was the
truth.
venue.
The
gig.
venue for sure.
So maybe that was it. But it's I
venue
remember
was
seeing Swans, and then you were obviously headlining.
The venue was our first gig in London. We came over.
That must have been it then. I don't know why.
We were opening for Daniel Dax and SBK.
Right,
Surgical Penis Clinic. Why
did they never have a top 5?
I was so like excited to be playing with that lot because I had seen them in New York and they were just this industrial, clatter, and they were great. And but they had just then decided to become a bit more of an electro dance group, and that was their
and they changed their name to Surgical Clinic.
And we got into an argument with Danielle Dax because she wanted to play second, which was like the more primo spot, and we had just trudged through Europe playing to like very few people, and we're like penniless and destitute and freezing cold and just kind of wanted to like go home. And we were at the venue, and it was our last show before actually getting on one of those People Airlines flights back home. Yeah, and we got like an argument with Danielle Dax, and we said, God, we've come all this way, and we were told, that we were going to play second. And she goes, well, it's too bad. You've been abroad, and I haven't. And it's like this kind of thing. And I was like, and so she wouldn't budge. So we went on first. And maybe you were there. I mean, as you say. I mean, I don't
remember Daniel Dax. Maybe I arrived. Maybe I missed Daniel Dax.
The only person I've really met who's there who remembers it quite distinctly is Robin Rembo, aka Scanner.
Okay,
he was there, and he always talks about it. He's like, it was like it was a very defining moment for him to see this evening's of bands. But we were ceremoniously thrown off stage. We came out and we started playing. Lee's guitar amp blew up, and you could smell the smoke from the tubes. And we were just like yowling and smashing our guitars and trying to get through these songs. And there was like 3 lads leaning against the stage, and everybody else was at the back bar. When I say everybody else,
I was at the back bar.
There's like maybe 20, 30 people at the back bar. And just like, what is this? Like, why would we even pay attention to this? But these 3 lads were just like leaning against the stage, and they were just looking up at us, and they were just going, brilliant, brilliant. And I always wondered who they were. Like, like what happened to them? Where did their lives turn out to
Bobby
be?
Gillespie, Jim Reed.
And then those big curtains at the venue started slowly to close. Like at 20 minutes into it, and I started hammering my guitar against the curtains, and you could just hear it going thump, thump through the PA.
For any listeners out there that don't know this, obviously Thurston was you probably don't like the word leader, but like the front man of one of the biggest bands of the 80s and 90s, Sonic Youth, and we don't have time to tell their story. I'll just assume you know how huge they became. I want to sort of jump right into the kind of New York scene and everything that you got involved with there, from kind of No Wave to the Noise Fest that you created, and because this is where there's real kind of intersection with jazz, free jazz, and experimental music, and there's a Knitting Factory, and there's John's. So much going on. I mean, there's extraordinary moment in the book where you talk about, I'd never realized this, that Michael Gira of the Swans had a fling with Madonna, who was just a kid.
He loves to talk about this, by the way.
Well, I'm surprised I didn't know. But you talk about Madonna sitting on his lap in some bar, and she's just like this some spunky kid in downtown New York.
She was definitely that. She was just in the neighborhood, and she kind of, the fact that she was actually gorgeous. I mean, she really was, and so not everybody was.
Really? So in downtown New York on the Lower East Side,
I mean, there were some good looking junkies, ladies and gents, but Madonna was she was kind of she was obviously kind of special, and so when the Danceteria Club opened, She became very integral to that, but she wasn't the only one. But she was kind of flouncing around. I know that she was known by the one name Madonna, and that she was like recording something. And her first record was Everybody. And but we didn't really give her that much credence. And I remember her playing at Danceteria and then walking in, and then we were like, let's get out of here, because we weren't really interested in that kind of, we were interested in dance music so much, we were interested in more sort of destructive ideas. And so that was just all there was to it. It was nothing about her that I thought she was kind of certainly a nice person. I don't know, I never got a bad vibe
what
from
a
her.
great time to be living in New York, because so much stuff was coming out of that business. I mean, I found post-punk in England a strain, because it was very dour, very political. And so all the no-wave stuff coming out of New York was just so refreshing. And also I just love black music, and it, all of that sort of stuff was part of it. And it must be amazing.
Well,
being there.
and rap taking off. You write about your first.
I mean, hip hop and punk are
experiences.
really intimate bedfellows in a way in the late '70s, early '80s, and they're really they're both radical musics of, and they grow together and they integrate. Certainly, I mean, and then the fact that James Chance was so interested in R&B and funk music and wanting to sort of put that in this kind of like punk world, was just, it was really organic, as well as being genius, and it just, and the gigs were just like super wild. And in some ways there was this whole aspect of punk rock that was like anti-disco, but that was that was just, and it was against this sort of the vapidity of disco, that aspect of disco, of just like the kind of cocaine sniffing, double knit trouser wearing kind of like, Studio 54 crowd. But the essence of that music, which sort of came out of R&B and funk, was what really appealed to a lot of true musicians in punk rock, not only in New York, but certainly in London. So you heard it in the Gang of Four, you heard it in Girls at Our Best, you heard it in, and so.
And you think about something like Arthur Russell, of course.
And then there's Arthur Russell coming out of like more of this kind of like art world milieu of the kitchen.
I was electrified by Defunct, by James Blood Ulmer. I mean, I saw both their first shows when they came to London first, and again, this links towards what we're going to be talking about, the free jazz aspects, because James Blood Ulmer was Ornette Coleman's guitar player for a chunk of time, and kind of basically learnt harmonics and all that stuff.
Well, should we get to Byron Coley, the wonderful Byron Coley?
Well, Byron is there as well, and Byron is sort of sleeping on park benches, and he's like, and he's also sleeping in the New York rocker offices, and he's very, he's a wild child downtown, and he's managing Lydia's group, Eight-Eyed Spy to some degree, and being on the road with them. And
Lydia, who incidentally, I just have to drop this in because I love this moment, where Lydia Lunch, the great Lydia Lunch, dismisses Patti Smith to you as a barefoot hippie. That just sums up the no-wave aesthetic, really, doesn't it?
Well, the thing with the no-wave bands, but whether it's Lydia and Teenage Jesus and the Jerks, or any of the bands on the Brian Eno quote-unquote produced No New York record, it's not like they are post-punk. It's not like they come after punk. They're really concurrent with it. I mean, the bands, they formulate around 76. I mean, a lot of the members of DNA come to New York in 74 or 75. So they're there, and they're kind of part of the scene. And so when Television and Patti Smith Group and Blondie and the Ramones are really sort of defining what's going on at CBGB. And first they were at this place called Mother's, and then they went to Max's, and then CBGB starts allowing them in, and that just becomes a real kind of clubhouse for everybody. But these other people are already on the scene.
But they're even less commercial.
They're way less.
And you use the word nihilistic.
Yeah.
And you begin to be more, but you begin to be attracted to this kind of very nihilistic downtown kind of thing.
Well, their ideas are spurned on by just sort of like the lifestyle of living in downtown New York, where you're pretty. It's almost a total sense of impoverishment, and you kind of don't have to work. All you have, Liddy would just say, all I have to do is like, get a job in a cocktail bar for like a week, and then that'll pay
and crash on someone's sofa.
And this is like, I kind of got it made, and I can just sort of write. She comes to New York to be a writer, to be a poet.
Exactly.
A lot of people sort of come to New York to do whatever it is. You write, you would like make a film, you do this or that, and you all meet each other, and you all see each other in the streets. New York is 3 miles wide, 12 miles long. So it's a very compacted city.
It's a small place,
Nobody has a car at all.
Nobody needs a car.
You don't need it. And you walk everywhere. And if you can sort of like, you can sneak onto the subway even, it's so it's fairly lawless. It's kind of, we talk about it so romantically in retrospect, but at the time it was, it was
pretty grimy.
It was pretty, it was scary,
Scary,
and I would run home,
and some bad drugs. I mean, there's a lot of heroin around.
And if you had proclivity towards drugs, you were in trouble. It would take.
If you were living on Avenue A at 13th Street,
I just never had any interest in narcotics. So thankfully, but
good for you.
But I knew a lot of people did certainly.
Chris Needs, of course, we've had him on podcast.
The king of Avenue.
He talks about that period of living there.
If we get back to Byron, who also I don't think was in any way a kind of drug casualty. So we just in terms of jazz and free jazz, Byron starts making tapes for you. Yeah, correct. He starts taping his favorite out there jazz albums.
I didn't know Byron in New York.
Okay,
we kind of were in the same places, and when I met him in Los Angeles, when I first went out after meeting Kim, and we became a couple, and then her family lived in L.A., and I went out there for the first time.
Because Kim had grown up, Kim Gordon, this obviously of Sonic Youth.
Kim Gordon, she grew up in L.A.
She grew up in L.A.
She's, and she's 5 years older, so she had this experience of seeing things in L.A. from an early period. I think she saw the Beatles, like at Candlestick Park, and
she also played you jazz albums, didn't she?
And she was involved with musicians in LA that were very sort of really into the whole, impulse world, blue note world of jazz and 60s jazz. So she had all these records. And so we never really talked about that. But when we went to LA, all her old records were in her parents' like kind of, record rack, in the living room. And I was like going through them, and I was like, I don't know this stuff.
Who's Eric Dolphy?
And I was very curious. And a lot of my curiosity was because I knew that people like James Chance would talk about it. People in the no wave scene would even Tom Verlaine would talk about Albert Eiler. Albert Eiler's live at the Village Vanguard record, he would name check, and I was like, I would see that record once in a while in record stores, and it had this kind of psychedelic swirly cover. I was like, what is this? So I didn't know what it was sonically so much. Of course, I heard jazz, but I never really could sort of put it in any kind. I didn't know how to listen to it. Hearing it on the radio, the announcers would always back announce each player on the session. Elvin Jones on drums, so and so on bass, so and so. And I was like, they don't do that with rock records. They don't say, they don't like name the members of each of the songs. They just name the group, And so that to me was like, there's a certain dignity to jazz that I just like, I really am curious about. And there's a certain dark aspect to the music too that really was curious to me, because I actually was very interested in that coloring of music. And so looking at all these records in her parents' house, I started to play them. She sort of pointed me towards the ones that she thought were really important, which was like there was a Mingus Impulse record, and there was certainly a Coltrane Impulse record. And I just started thinking more about it. And then, meeting Byron, he was working at the Rhino record store.
in Westwood.
And he had already, I knew him by his byline in Boston Rock magazine. In a couple of fanzines, I would see his byline. And being in LA, his byline was in the LA Reader.
And the Weekly.
And the both. LA Weekly. Yeah. And so I would see his name, and his writing was always really really kind of amazing. I mean, I was like, who is this guy? And he wrote to me out of the blue. He got my address from the Confusionist Sex album, and he wrote to me with a dollar bill stuffed into an envelope and said, "Here's $1. Can you send me a copy of Killer Fanzine? And by the way, that Contusions of Sex LP is quite magnificent." And I was like, okay, this total gonzo letter. I hope I kept it. And so he was working at Rhino, and I went into Rhino, and I didn't have any money. And I bought a really cheap Norman Greenbaum record, the Spirit in the Sky. Yeah. Because I wanted to cover that song. I thought it'd be a really cool song before, it was covered.
Yeah, it was covered by Doctor and the Medics.
Doctor and the Medics.
It was like number one.
Yeah, exactly. They beat me to it. Anyway, Byron took the record and he introduced himself. Said, "Oh, you're Byron." And and then he put the record in the bag and he said, "Gratis." And he gave me this $1 record for free.
And you were like, "I wish I picked a more expensive record."
Exactly. If only I knew. But they had, that was a great record store. Nels Klein was working there, and they had pictures of Bo Diddley everywhere, and they said Rhino Records where Bo is king. I was like, this place is fantastic. And then we kind of made plans to hang out, and we just drove around LA and we were just talking about mutual interests and stuff like that. And then we just kept in touch, went back to New York, and then he wrote and said, "I'm moving back to Boston. That's where I come from."
And he wrote pieces about Sonic Youth, obviously, including
and my
a
wife and I
spin.
And then he hooked up with Jimmy Johnson, who had a hardcore fanzine called Forced Exposure. Like 3 issues had come out. It was all Minor Threat, Government Issue, SOA, SSD Control. It was a hardcore fanzine. And Byron said, "I'll be the jazz editor." And that to me was already audacious enough to call yourself a jazz editor in a hardcore fanzine.
I don't know, it was just two of them. Sort of putting riding on top of a suitcase. So we'll have a jazz department with me as the editor.
And so Sonic Youth was one of the first bands, and Jimmy Johnson was expanding certainly his horizons of what, outside of hardcore. And so he wanted to write about the birthday party and Sonic Youth and Lydia and Diamanda Galas and Mission of Burma. And so we were one of the first to sort of be outside of the hardcore, parameter. So that's when Byron and Jimmy came to our apartment, and they sat down with us, and Byron spent the weekend there sleeping on the couch. Well, actually, he slept in a chair. And I was very impressed by that.
It's hard to do.
Well, I can lay some blankets down for you. He's like, "No, I'm good." And he would just have like a cup of coffee always in his hand, and then he would just
while he was asleep.
He would just sleep. And it's and as soon
as a skill.
And then I would get up like these 9 or 10 a.m. and then he would just sort of like park up and go, "Yeah, what are we doing? What's going on?" He was just like really ready to rock. And we would go to record stores and then that's where I realized he was an insane record collector.
Yes,
but I realized that he knew everything about anything that had to do with recorded music. I mean, he was really well versed, and he had just like self-scholarly about the whole thing. So he was the one I asked. I said, "Can you make me cassette tapes of like a primer of just like kind of contemporary jazz?" And he did. And it was like at least a dozen of them, tiny little handwriting on these cassette tapes. And he was really good with making mixtapes on cassette. And he did great series of like garage rock mixtapes on cassette.
So if we fast forward many, many years, how was the idea for Now Jazz Now hatched between you and Byron?
Well, when I started, I got really immersed in what I was hearing on these cassette tapes, and I started buying records. And then I started schooling myself on the history of jazz through the recorded documents. I read every book available. So I read all these books. I didn't really jump into free jazz. I was actually really into starting from Fletcher Henderson and moving forward. And I started listening to early Duke Ellington, Fletcher Henderson, big band jazz, right into the 60s kind of modal jazz scene of all around bop and bebop and post-bop. And then moving into more avant-garde jazz, I took it very steady. But there was one book in particular called The Freedom Principle by a jazz writer named John Litweiler, which is still available. And that really opened up the gates. That book and Leroy Jones's Black Music book.
Yeah.
Those two were really important.
What about Val Wilmer's As Serious As
I hadn't
Your Life?
read that yet.
You hadn't read that?
Yeah.
Okay.
But those two books were really, really pertinent. And so it got me into wanting to discover that whole world. And that was really hard to find. Those records were really hard to find because a lot of them were just sort of, they were small labels, they were artist-run labels. And then when I started getting into the whole world of European free improvisation, those labels, like in England, Derek Bailey and Evan Parker had Incus records. You know, in Italy there was Ictus records, and in the Netherlands there was Bevy Hast and ICP. Every country had their own sort of artist-run labels that the musicians kind of conducted the business with.
Yes.
But you never saw these records in record stores.
No.
And it's just like, well, who's buying these records? And then when you'd hear them, it would be just like these totally free improvisational plink-plonk kind of like moves, and I was like, who's listening to this? You know, it took me a long time to really process like what this music was, but I found it fascinating because in some ways it was more indie and punk rock than what was happening in the independent and punk rock scene.
Right.
You know, it had less ambitions towards, you know, waving its hands in the air and saying like, you know, appreciate this. It's just
I was going to ask these guys what your gateway drugs were into free jazz.
It's very strange because I got Serious As Your Life when it first came out, and I tried to listen to the music. I'd go and see like Evan Parker play in some basement in sort of London, and it felt like I'd been at a Trotskyist political meeting. Everyone was super serious, and it was all there was no fun there at all. And the book therefore sort of left me fairly cold. Then years later, and it's not really free jazz, but the London improvisation scene, which can be all kinds of musicians from not necessarily from jazz backgrounds at all, but just getting into making noises of various sorts.
Right.
Quite late in my life, I suddenly just fell into it, and I'm now an improvising guitar player myself, and you know, play one gig every sort of 6 months, you know. But it was about discovering that there's real joy in that music. It doesn't have to be the grim experience I had back in the 70s and early 80s of the Evan Parker gig with Barry Guy on bass and all sorts of stuff.
Jasper, how did you come to free jazz?
I think
because you're slightly younger than you, I suppose.
I think I can
tell me you were playing Albert Eiler when you were in your cot.
Well, I can solidly blame my parents. I was going to say, no, I mean, they took me to see Ornette Coleman.
Did they? Right.
So when I was like, I don't know, 8 or 10 or something.
Wow. Okay.
Which was pretty cool. But also they were going to, I mean, my mum's sax teacher was this guy, Gerhard, who had a group in Cologne called the Kölner Saxophon Mafia.
Yeah, I've heard of them.
Who are a fucking cool group. And so they would go to the Merce Jazz Festival, my parents, and see that stuff. So it was sort of always just floating around. And then when I started playing jazz myself, I was like, oh, what's this end of it? And I went, when I was a student, I somehow ended up in like an improvising workshop with Evan Parker, which was an interesting experience. And so, it was sort of always there. I don't think I needed to sort of get into it in terms of like, I didn't read about it at all. And so I was curious to ask actually whether you think that it had to be unlocked for you somehow by reading about it, because you started by talking about like reading this book and that book, and whether that, was it that was simply the way that you discovered what the records were and then the sonics were self-explanatory, or did the reading help understand the sonics?
Well, the reading certainly helped. I mean, going to see the musicians play is what was key, and I noticed that there was a lot of the ideas of approaching the instrument, and the idea of just like having the sound sort of define the spontaneous composition. To me, I related to it almost immediately on a level of like, oh, that's what is going on in Sonic Youth right now. I mean, that's that's how we conduct ourselves in rehearsals. We weren't coming in there with there was no notated music, certainly, and it was all based on these ideas that were that sprang up through group interplay, and it was always improvisation. So you would improvise in rehearsal, and you're like, what was that you just did? Yeah. What was that thing we just did like a few minutes ago? Like when we had cooled down from playing, it was like there was something that happened 10 minutes ago, and so we started getting cassette recorders just so we could document rehearsals, and we would rewind them and go like, that's that section right there. Let's try to replicate that again. And of course, you could never replicate it because it happened in real time, and you weren't like, remembering exactly which fret you were playing. And so you would try to sort of, get as close to it. But it was all about the ideas anyway. And so the idea of improvisation to me made so much sense. The fact that there was a genre of music that devoted itself to actually improvisation, on the bandstand was so fascinating. And so I really took it upon myself to go to every gig I could. And then I regretted all those years that I missed going to Ali's Alley and the Ladies Fort, where all of these musicians had been playing just within a 3-block radius of where I was living. And I would see them just by happenstance sometimes, seeing Arthur Doyle and Beaver Harris play with the no-wave guitarist Rudolph Gray at any given time. But I wasn't thinking like, oh, those are jazz guys playing with like the no-wave guy. Just like, it's just this thing. And, it's just like... But when I was able to sort of all of a sudden be able to sort of place people in this kind of lineage and this history, that became more interesting. I just became really interested in its history, and all those interconnections between the session work and the people on the scene. I just became so utterly fascinated by it, and I started going to see Charles Gale and William Hooker, and it was William Hooker who came up to me after going to a number of shows. And he goes, I heard about you, man. You're in this band, Sonic Youth, and blah, blah, blah. And they're like, we got to play together. And I was like, oh, I don't really play. I mean, I play in a band, but, the idea of playing free improvised guitar music with a free improvising jazz drummer. I said, well, I don't play jazz. I was like, I would never fool myself into like, I've never like studied jazz. I don't play jazz, but I can improvise as such. That's what led me into it. I played with William Hooker in a duo at some gig somewhere, and we were on the same bill, as it were, with Derek Bailey and Tony Oxley.
Wow.
That John Zorn had set up. And I was just like, that's when I met Derek for the first time. And, and I was already very aware of what he was doing. He was just had such a wonderful demeanor, because it was sort of this very sort of, there was this confidence, this trusting of what was going on with his own personal ability, and just allowing himself to sort of be in this place where it was really socialist, where it was all equal value on the stage. On the stage, there was no leaders, and he didn't use any effects pedals except for a volume pedal, which he used very masterfully. And he just sort of had this very sort of debonair, casual quality of playing this extremely sort of radical guitar playing, And it wasn't radical guitar playing where it was like he was screeching feedback, Hendrix or whatever. It was actually this very... it was all about the spaces in between.
The fingers.
Sort of,
You can really hear his hands in a very particular way, which I find really interesting. I mean, I love some of this stuff. Absolutely hate some of the stuff. It's the nature of what he
but it's completely unapologetic.
Absolutely,
and it's not looking for acceptance at all. Which is very unusual. I mean, when you're in a band and you go on stage or anything, a lot of that equation deals with seeking acceptance. You want that. When a lot of times when I would see free improvised music, specifically with somebody like Derek, there was none of that. It was just like, I'm here, you're here. If this is not something you care for, bye. It's just like, that's all there's to it. So he wasn't looking. His agenda was not to play at Wembley.
And also to acknowledge the fact that it doesn't always work. I mean, it more often not doesn't work. It's the sort of nature of free improvised music is that it's a huge risk all the time. And you've got to just trust yourself and the people you're playing with, and fingers crossed.
Since we're talking about Derek Bailey, who died 20 years ago on Christmas Day, or a little over 20 years ago when this episode goes out. So, Mark, will you tell us about this audio interview?
Well, it's our great friend David Toop on the phone to Derek in January 1995. He talks about sort of the early groups, improvisation groups, and their political, conceptual, and religious differences. All these things were part of the package. Politics. He talks about religion being something that affected some. What constitutes free improvisation? Working with such divergent musicians as Tony Oxley, as you mentioned, Gavin Bryars, who's not what one would regard as an improvising musician at all. Let's have a listen to the first clip. It's about. Well, the company was a group, it's a very loose group that he had, but it's about collaboration. Let's have a listen.
But I've always thought that the most fertile, there's some word that I can't find here, but fertile or productive or something, results from this kind of playing have come from when you've got ill-fitting elements. It's almost as though the rubbing together of the elements in order to make it work. The old analogy of produce the pearl, you know. It's just so you get. I mean, this is in more like since the time you played in Company. This was like the more or less one of the main principles behind Company. That it seemed to me that it wasn't any point in getting all the failure companies, and I can think of one or two that were weeks that were, to me, I thought, not very interesting, were when you got a bunch of guys who all were good players, and they all played the same kind of music.
Yeah, I mean, that sort of echoes what we've just been saying to some extent. He talks about constantly changing the people, different elements he works with is productive, that never been stuck. So let's listen to that, actually. And his dissatisfaction with orthodoxy. Let's have a listen to the next clip.
One of the things that seemed to be necessary, and this is retrospective actually, I couldn't have articulated this at the time, was a dissatisfaction with orthodox forms of music making. They were okay. I was happy enough in some respects, but you couldn't. There seemed to be a lot of things they weren't saying, if I can put it that way. And I think that applied to other people, that they were looking for ways of saying things that weren't being said. I mean, this was also the time of huge popular music. You know, I mean, the popular music had exploded, and so it was a bit strange to be pursuing an alternative practice, although there was room for it as well. So it's a peculiar time. But that business of different people, I think, to me, it's always been a central part.
He talks about Incus Records, which he co-founded, celebrating its 25th anniversary, releasing an album by John Zorn and Fred Frith. Of course, you're very familiar with both those people. He also, it's very amusing, talks about the co-owner Karen Brookman's fascination with serial killers. But I loved listening to this because I just liked him. Just listening to his voice, I really liked him.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. He was a gentleman. You know. I was actually at the Incus office just the other day.
Yeah.
Derek's wife, Karen Brookman, who also has passed away the last few years. Her brother was emptying out the house, and part of it is going to be used as a residence, and then he's going to relocate to the south of France. I don't think you would mind me telling you this because I don't think there's anything. There's no reason why. But I went up to visit there because he was showing me Derek's guitars.
Right.
And I wanted to take pictures of them.
Yes.
And I did. I went up there and I took pictures of them, and I kind of played them a couple of them. And it was really wonderful. But there was the Incus office completely emptied out, and that was where all the magic happened. I mean, Derek sort of gave up the label, and his wife Karen took it over.
Yes.
It's just like, I don't want to I'm not interested in doing this
when
business.
When she wasn't collecting books about serial killers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he should have done an improv duo with Lydia Lunch. She's really into serial killers as well. That would have been
something.
Yeah.
I really liked some of the last stuff he did. He was listening to pirate radio and started listening to drum and bass.
Yeah.
And I did these recordings of just him improvising over existing drum and bass tracks.
Yeah.
And they're really quite compelling. They're good, I mean, I just like the fact that he could hear something which was completely out of his immediate experience and adopt it just straight away. That's really...
The only time we played together was in New York at a club called the Tonic, which was a bit of a experimental music avant-garde clubhouse there, not unlike Cafe Auto here at the time. And we were in the same room together. I mean, I know he was there. He had come over to do a company thing in New York, and he was at the Tonic. Maybe he played, my memory is a little rusty on this, but there was a lot of people on the bandstand. Lauren Mazzacane was up there. I think maybe Jim O'Rourke was up there. And both Derek and I were asked if we would also join this group of people on stage. Maybe a little too many people on stage. Yeah. And Derek said, I'm keen if you are. And I said, yeah, well, let's do it. I mean, and inside I'm going like, wow, I'm going to actually, play guitar with Derek Bailey. This is fantastic. And so we both sort of stand next to each other, and we both have these two little amps that we're plugged into. And we know that it's going to be slightly caterwauling up there. And Derek looked at me and said, you know what? I think I'm just going to unplug and play acoustically here, which meant like nobody's going to hear me at all. At all. And the way he sort of said it was just sort of like, F this, I was just like, why even bother? I think, but for my own, gratification, I think it'll be great just to feel the strings, and I sort of got that immediately, and I said, you know what, I think I'll join you, and I unplugged, and we both turned our amps off, and this noisy improv started happening on stage, and we just stood next to each other, just like clacking on our strings.
That's lovely.
And nobody could hear us. Nobody bothered to say anything afterwards, like I didn't hear you or whatever. In fact, it was like, that sounded great. Is
there a recording of this available?
God, there must be. I would hope so. There's definitely a photo of it. I put a photo in the book.
Yes,
of that evening, because also Ron Ashton of the Stooges was there. And it was right when we were recording for the Velvet Goldmine movie, of Todd Haynes' movie. And so Ron was in town, and we were in the studio. And I remember going down to Tonic with Ron and saying, you got to see this music that was going on. And for Ron, it was just like, yeah, he's seen it all anyway. He was just like, and I introduced Ron to Derek, and Derek to Ron. And I was like, I got to get a picture with these guys. And so somebody took that photo. I don't know who it was. Whoever took that photo, I used it in my book, and I'm willing to sort of make good on this. But I had to include it because it's just like to have my picture taken.
Blink and you miss it.
Between Ron and Ron Ashton,
which is like the two poles of your existence.
Exactly. So I told.
That's amazing.
When I told Derek, I said, I'd like you to meet the guitar player from the Stooges. He's like, yeah, that'd be great, And then when I introduced them, they were both very gentlemanly to each other, and and then that was that. And then later, Derek said, when you told me that you were going to introduce me to somebody from the Stooges, I thought I was going to meet Mo or Larry or Curly.
Which of the three? Yes.
Yeah. I said,
he wasn't in the Three Stooges.
He's one of the most significant guitar players in the history of of punk rock.
That's brilliant.
So that was kind of funny.
Yeah. I'm really interested in something that you said earlier, which is that first and foremost, it was about going to see the music live, and that absolutely chimes with my experience of it, and was also mirrors the first thought that I had when I saw Now Jazz Now, which I think is a great document to exist, but it's a difficult thing given that it is a book about recordings. Yeah. How do you kind of bridge the gap between the live and the recording, and why is it, what?
I mean, they're relatable, but they're two different animals. Mm-hmm. I mean, to me, live music was always about the coding of what was going on, on the stage, and seeing how the communication between musicians on stage and what that was always to me that was really an ineffable, magical thing to see. It's like, how people were cueing each other, how they were looking at each other, and how they were playing off each other, and seeing jazz groups per se, but really in the context of free improvisation, that was always really, to me, at its most magical, because there's this idea of trust. And so there was these unwritten rules that somebody like Evan Parker or John Stevens, the great percussionist, would say, like, if you can't hear any of the other musicians, you're playing too loud, or Evan Parker saying you have to know when to take the horn out of your mouth.
Yeah.
This idea of what a real-time composition is. And those things were really, to me, were really elucidating. But as far as records are concerned, no, this book, Now Jazz Now, it's record collector geek book.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all about, these kind of vibrational documents.
Yeah.
And there's all these aspects that go on with a record. It's just like what it looks like, what it feels like, is it a gatefold? Can you separate seeds and stems in the middle of it? All of these things come into play. I know a Japanese record dealer who can take the record out of the sleeve and smell it, and he can tell you where it was pressed, whether it was in Poland or Czechoslovakia or UK. And
the other great thing about, in this case about vinyl, is that 20 minutes is almost the ideal length of a free improvised set.
Yeah, right.
It curiously is. After 20 minutes, it's like, they've run out of ideas. And, you have a really quite limited set of ideas.
Is that just because you can't be bothered to play from
there is a degree of truth. But I remember this is the anniversary of, in fact, 15 years ago, in a freezing cold room in Hither Green, I saw a cellist called Hannah Marshall and a tenor player called Rachel Mousson play 20 minutes of possibly the most beautiful music I've ever heard in my life. And that was, for me, this huge discovery that I could go to one of these. My friend Richard Sanderson used to put on these events in the Green, and he had a record label called Linear Obsessional, and there would be 4 or 5 acts, all playing like no more than 20 minutes, and 3 of them would be ghastly in one respect or another, but one, almost invariably, one act would just, one set would get the hair standing up the back of my neck.
Hannah Marshall and Rachel Mousson are wonderful musicians in free improvisation. And they're one of the reasons, like, I really feel so gracious living in London. I've been here for 12 years. But to be engaged with that community, with players such as those two, it really makes my musical life really rewarding.
It's given me a musical life again. I was an R&B musician back in the 80s, Then for years I just stopped. And suddenly it was like, this is, And I mean, like Rachel Mousson, she's got a tone which is nearer Coleman Hawkins than Albert Ayler.
Yeah, she's wonderful. Yeah.
She's an amazing player. It's all squeaks and bumps and scrunks and
Sorry
so
about
on.
the coughing, yeah.
But no, it was just magical.
Just want to chuck a couple of things in here as we draw to the end of this episode. Obviously, for someone like me, most of the albums in the book are very, very obscure. I mean, there's obviously Coltrane's Meditations is in there, and there are names that I know very well. And then there's really obscure stuff, including a 1980 album by, if I can pronounce it correctly, Borbetomagus. Well, and I just wanted, because there's just a fantastic sentence in it. Byron wrote that page, and he says, many listeners deny it's jazz of any kind, but those bow tie arsewipes can take a flying fuck at the moon. That's a distilled essence of Coley.
This is not an academic music book.
No. I mean,
this is a rock writer's book.
My one question is actually having the word jazz in the title, and I sort of understand why it had to be there.
Yeah.
But what I find interesting about improvisation now is what I said earlier, is that you've got people from all kinds of different backgrounds now doing it.
Well, even Peter Brotzman said at one point in the whole scene of free improvisation across Europe, he said at one point we all sort of came out of the idiom of jazz, and that sort of defined who we are as players. But at one point we knew that we were we were exacting a music that was completely outside of that idiom, and it was standing alone in its own definition. And so that's when we decided to call it free improvisation, as opposed to the reason we called Now Jazz Now is because Now Jazz Now was a phrase that was in that you would see in Paris in like the Actuel magazine that covered avant-garde music, and it was always like. It was late 60s, and it was like Now Jazz Now. It was all about free jazz, and in Paris at the time, it was all about embracing this music where it was somewhat very polarizing in the USA and across around the world actually. But in Paris, in France, it was like really embraced, and there was a lot of people supporting it. We weren't actually going to use that title because we were thinking like maybe it shouldn't say jazz in it anyway, and we kept thinking of different titles. It was a lot of back and forth. I have a litany of titles that Byron sent that were probably would have got us arrested if we put this.
Take a flying fuck at the moon.
I'd have gone with that.
I'd buy that book.
I also do just want to chuck in the second thing, which is the name of a writer we haven't mentioned yet in the episode, the great Brian Case, who is the featured writer as this episode goes out, and it ties in with the book in that we've selected not only a 1978 interview with David Toop himself, the interviewer with Derek Bailey clips we listened to, so 1978 conversation with David, but also a 1975 NME interview with Cecil Taylor that Brian did, and 10 years later, a Melody Maker interview with Archie Shepp. Those are two names, obviously, I do know, and two kind of giants of free jazz, written by, I know for you, Mark, one of the great music writers of all.
Huge gateway drug for jazz.
Just reading Brian.
Reading Brian in the 70s.
So, so him and Val Wilmer we did an episode with, and so these are two sort of elder statespersons.
And they're great friends. And
absolutely, absolutely. So, yes, as I say, we're drawing near to the end of this episode. Have you guys got anything you want to add?
Two short ones. Bill Evans been interviewed by Michael Watts, Melody Maker.
So to be clear, these are pieces that we've added to Rock's Back Pages,
which will be in around the time when this is broadcast. Melody Maker 1972, and Bill Evans says, "I don't think it's right to say that because the world is in a state of violence, I'm going to be violent, and so is my music. That just promotes violence. What's real is not necessarily art. The 59th Street subway station at rush hour is real, but I wouldn't want to express it musically. It doesn't make it art because it's real," which I think is kind of really
very interesting.
Very interesting.
Given what we've been talking about.
And then just another one is a throwaway one, really. Orchestral maneuvers in the Darks, Andy McCluskey, to Neil Tennant in Smash Hits in 1984. The question is, who is your favourite member of the royal family? His answer was, I think that should be who's my least hated member of the royal family. I'm particularly anti-royalist. I loathe them all. Not only are they an unnecessary nuisance, but I find the British public's love for them loathsome. It makes me cringe. I suppose my least hated member at the moment is probably Prince Andrew, just because he keeps embarrassing the rest of them. That's in 1984, and plus ça change.
Prescient.
And we can no longer refer to him as Prince Andrew.
No, that's right.
Rather brilliant.
It's good.
It just makes me want to ask you quickly, given the former Prince Andrew's potential role in inadvertently bringing down your president, just sort of.
It's not my president.
First of all, I think the MAGA faithful would tell you that he is your president, whether you like it or not, and you show that man some respect. But you've been living in London for quite a long time now. How does it feel to
Barack
be here?
Obama became president, and we kind of rubbed our hands together and said, our work is done here. And so we came over here to live and enjoy the...
What year did you move here?
I mean, like I said, it was like 11, 12 years ago. Okay. So, figured that out.
Yeah. So you've been here a while now. You're basically
I lived in Stoke Newington for about 10 years.
Yes. I'd see you in Cafe Oto.
That's right. Yeah. I hardly go there anymore. It's really, but I I feel like, at this point in time, I'm kind of happy not to go to there every night.
Where are you living now?
In an undisclosed location.
An underground bunker.
I don't go for two reasons. One, the bar staff are just hideously supercilious at Cafe Ozo. And the last great thing I saw there was This Is Not This Heat, which was sensational. I mean, I saw them back in the day twice, and they were better this time round.
Yeah.
I mean,
I thought it was great, too, as well.
Did you play?
I played on the first couple of gigs.
Yeah.
And then my guitar player, I say my guitar player, the guitar player in my London group, James Edwards, was essential to that
I'm
group.
pretty sure you were playing them at the show.
And then Alex Ward, who's also playing with me in my London group, he was involved with it as well.
It was brilliant. It was
really good. It was really good fun.
Jasper, what have you got for us?
Oh, as always, I love to lower the tone. I've got...
That's what you do every episode.
Oh, yeah. I've got one piece, The Beastie Boys, in Loaded in June 1994, with who will have been our previous guest, James Brown, interviews them. It's a great long piece. And it's very funny. Over the next few hours and days, they will talk about how a monkey stole Youch's flip-flop in Tibet, how they used to ring up and greet Orson Welles like they were old friends, and how the grass they kept chopping up in the coffee grinder is being grown by the government for legitimately prescribed marijuana smokers. You'll notice that the M-word crops up a lot. Along with the mellow feel of old reggae singles, the chaos of punk, and the hilarity of placing weird spoken word samples over their own mind-bent grooves, the drug Tony Blair once legalised is a major factor in shaping the way the Beastie Boys records sound. Bearing this in mind, it's unrealistic to assume the band will focus on questions of any real gravity, so I only have 4. This they like. As they're back as they were when they started, jamming with their friends and releasing it for public consumption, and doing Loaded is like running a fanzine again, the 4 questions are of the appropriate standard. 1. When did you form? 2. What are your influences? 3. Have you any batteries for my tape recorder? And 4. At what point did the Beastie Boys begin to change? It has to be this way. We are children in men's bodies. Ask about their music and they'll slip into mock collegiate tones and begin batting the question round like the Three Stooges, poking each other in the eye. And yet somehow they cut through the haze and begin explaining how 3 little piggies grew up, blew up and grew up. I just think it's great writing. It really is.
That is good.
It's very cool.
James Brown was always fun to read, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, he must have written about Sonic Youth, I'm guessing.
I was just thinking about this rock writer in London, Bug. You know what I'm talking about? The Bug. Jack Barron. He just passed away.
His funeral was yesterday.
Yes.
Yeah. The funeral was yesterday.
Yeah.
I saw him about a year ago somewhere.
Tuesday.
Okay, I saw him about a year ago at South Bank, and I hadn't seen him in like 2 decades.
Yeah.
And he was somebody in the 80s who was really important to me. I thought he was a really great writer. I always have this great recollection of being in his car when he was doing a Sonic Youth piece and driving through London, and he had just gotten a cassette tape of Psycho Candy. And we were, the buzz about the Mary Chain was like the tantamount at that point. I'd seen them, we had played with them, the singles were cool, but this album was insane. It was like, it was such a groundbreaking record. And Jack had this cassette, and he was just like, "You have to hear this." And we drove around just aimlessly through London while he was like playing this cassette of Psycho Candy that he had gotten from McGee, at stun volume in his car. And it was just like such a great moment. And so seeing him 2 decades later at South Bank at somewhere in a restaurant or something. Yeah. And I went up I recognized him immediately with that patch over his eye. I said, Jack, his name was Bug. He used to have a pseudonym, like the Bug or Bug something.
Yes, I'll have to look through my WhatsApp messages to see what someone said.
And I went up to him and I said, "Hey, Jack," and he immediately, he still had this kind of, imperious kind of like quality to him, and we just like talked, and I brought that story up to him. He goes like, "You know what? I always remember that too." Yeah. He was a great writer.
A lovely man, and we're all. He was another Chelsea fan, so it's something that the three of us have in common.
Have you adopted a London soccer team? While you've been
living in Stoke Newington, I was pulled in 2 different directions. Obviously, with Tottenham and Arsenal. So my neighbor upstairs was hardcore Arsenal, and he took me to a couple of games. The drummer in my group, Jem Dalton, is full on Tottenham.
Oh, okay.
Deb Googe, bass player in my group,
Oh, former My Bloody Valentine.
Well, she's out on the road right now.
She's on with them,
BV.
Yes.
Completely Man U, like staunchly Man U.
That's where she's from, isn't it? Up north. Yeah.
So when I introduced her to my neighbor who was Arsenal, I said, he's a big Arsenal fan. And she looked up at him and she said, "That's because you're a fucking idiot." And I was just like, that is no way to break the ice. But they fell in love with each other because they knew how to talk football to each other.
Well, that wonderful story brings us to the end of episode 219 of the Rock's Back Pages podcast.
Oh, if you want the book, I should promote it.
I was going to mention, obviously, but you're going to sell it better than I can.
Go to our website, ecstaticpeacelibrary.net. So, and pre-order it.
There'll be a link in the show notes.
Well,
I mean, there'll be a link in the show. Yeah, of course.
Well, thank you so much, Thurston, for joining us today.
Yeah, anytime. You know where to find me.
Delightful.
And I do live nearby. I'm close by here. So I moved from the north. I'm north.
I think your old friend Peter Wright may have mentioned that. You live in a slightly more genteel part of London.
Yeah. There's ducks and swans and
you're giving it away now. Ducks and swans.
I mean, as soon as I get
exactly where you living in St James's Park.
Yes,
making spy drops at lunchtime.
Eating the swans. Anyway,
last time I went to Cafe Auto, I got out of Dawson Junction and I got in the same person who I've always seen in the last 10 years just like came up to me and said, "Give me some fucking money." And I was just like, "Oh, welcome back."
So that brings us to the end of episode 219. Do read Thurston's memoir, Sonic Life, and do buy the new Now Jazz Now, as he has promoted it and mentioned it. We will be back for episode 220 with former Melody Maker writer, author and biographer, and Saint-Étienne member Bob Stanley. So it's farewell and adieu from us and our guest Thurston Moore, and now all together in improvised harmony. Good. Bye bye.
That concludes episode 219 of the Rock's Back Pages podcast. Many thanks to special guest Thurston Moore. Now Jazz Now is published by Ecstatic Peace Library and available from ecstaticpeace.net. Those to Barney Hoskins and Mark Pringle, and it was co-hosted and produced by Jasper Murison and Bowie. The Rock's Back Pages podcast is part of the Pantheon Podcast Network. You can find thousands of articles, as well as hundreds of full-length audio interviews at rocksbackpages.com. Happy New Year!
That was huge fun. Honestly, that was really good fun. We need to take a photograph.
We do.
Where you loom above us. I know you have to actually duck to get through the door. And
I'm going to stand on the elephant's foot. Actually, Jasper, you could hold me up.